Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's really good to be live. So we'd like to welcome you on behalf of Ubuma Leadership, who are partnering with Constitution Hill to host these Memoirs of Tomorrow chats, which are basically going to be a series of conversations where we're going to sit down with some powerhouse women to discuss the significance of personal development and leadership. And I use that term powerhouse not loosely. I know usually we shy back from basking in our own greatness. So yes, we are two powerhouse women on this conversation today. The conversations are taking place during Constitution Hill's Basha Uhuru Festival, which is back for its 8th year this year. And today is, I guess, our first installment of these conversations. And for us, we come to the table today having looked at the history of a continent where, there's been so much that has happened. And especially now we're in a really special time for women, a time where we see a steadily growing number of female representation in areas of leadership. And it's a time where women are being afforded chances to fully realize their potential. And as much as, the whole theory and the way we look at it sounds really great, there's a problem and I guess a point that we need to discuss where we look at female leadership and a fact and a reality that there's always a state of having to negotiate what we need to sacrifice as female leaders to break the ceiling or to lean in or to get a seat at the table. And this constant compromise of self is something that we can truly say has robbed many women, including myself, of the ability to lead from an authentic, a secure, and a very confident space. And so we hope that in today's fireside conversation, we're going to have a very honest, reflective conversation about female leadership with a woman who I have read much about and are very excited to be on a conversation today. We have Ms. Rumbidzai Chisenga, and Rumbidzai is going to, I think, introduce herself. And then I will go through and give an introduction, and then we'll dive straight into the question. So Rumbidzai, over to you.
Thank you, Maryiam. You couldn't have read that much about me, though, because, I'm still young. I don't count as youth anymore, technically, but, I will claim my youthfulness. But it's really a pleasure to be here and to take part in this conversation. I am from Zimbabwe. Many of you would have guessed by my name. And I grew up in Harare. Ventured out to South Africa when I was old enough to go and study at university, and I've been living in South Africa since. My passion really revolves around reclaiming governance, and that's the work I find myself doing now, although I have a background in working in the private sector as well. So my current job, I head up our programming work, developing leaders across the continent, women leaders who are in the public governance space.
Okay, well, no, when I say I read about you, it's a lot of stalking. But thank you so much for that introduction. You're very humble about the work you do, and I'm very excited to learn a lot more as we have this conversation. Thank you again for taking away the time and for joining us on this chat. A little bit about myself. My name is Maryiam Elgoni. I am South African, but originally from North Sudan. And so, I was born and raised here, but Sudan is still where I call home. I am technically within the youth definition. I just passed 25 like 2 months ago, so I still like to claim it. And I work specifically around youth advocacy and engagement. A lot of my background has been in capacity building, and something I'm very passionate about is not giving youth a voice. I think we already have one, but training and supporting young people in utilizing that voice across all platforms and spaces. And so I think with those introductions out of the way, as much as we're phenomenal powerhouses, as was put by Ubuma, I think let's go straight to the conversation. And I think, we're going to look at 4 overarching questions and specifically looking at leadership. And I think let's start with the first one where, Rumbi, in your space as a woman and in leadership, if you could tell us a little bit about your journey in leadership, what has that been like as a young female leader?
So that's kind of a difficult question for me to answer because even though I am obviously a woman, I haven't always looked at leadership or my leadership journey or my experiences, uh, becoming a leader through the lens of a woman or even interrogated them through a gender lens. And that has mostly to do with the fact that I was raised among boys. I'm the only girl in my family, but both of my parents are, I think they just, decided that they were going to demonstrate a different kind of leadership, I suppose, before they'd even have kids. And so I was raised with an equal voice in my family. It was kind of a strange awakening for me when I left home and kind of entered the workspace and realized that I was expected to have fewer opinions or to be less clever or to be less than anyone because my upbringing had just kind of molded me into somebody who believed that my opinions mattered, my presence was valuable at any moment, and that I had a contribution to make to the world, and in fact that I was expected to be the best that I could be, to excel and not to compare myself, not even to my brothers. I think it was just a matter of, aim for the stars. That's who you are. And so I kind of my journey with embracing gender bias took it took a while for me to get to an appreciation of it. My initial response was when I faced kind of discrimination, my initial response was just, I'll do more to prove myself. And I don't need to back down. And I, in fact, sometimes I get a little bit irritated when women were speaking and it just sounded like, oh, we're embracing this victim mentality. I always thought, well, just do what you need to do, and then you can prove yourself. But I started to understand the kind of the structural biases and the hurdles that women have to go through. And I also started reflecting on the fact that if I was this privileged, I'm educated, I'm actually opinionated, and I am actually empowered.
Yeah.
But I find it difficult to accept just even my own presence in any space because of the structural barriers. How much harder is it for other women who may not be in the same position of privilege as I? And so this is how I ended up in the work that I'm doing now. But I just had to be honest and say that, for me, it wasn't an immediate, like, I get it. I'm a champion for women's empowerment. It was kind of a long-winded route that required me to mature in my appreciation of the world and how it impacted not just me, but other women.
Yeah, no, I think it's really interesting. And the whole idea of it, I think it's supposed to be a natural conversation. It's just as you were speaking, a lot of lights are clicking in my head when you speak about your upbringing. So I think even if we take a step back, and I'll speak a little bit more about my journey in leadership, because I think for me, it fit the more kind of traditional setting. I was a leadership positions in school. I was head girl. I was head of our charity committee. So I had that traditional leadership. But like taking a step back before that, you spoke about like the upbringing at home and growing up amongst boys. And I think to bring in a little bit of my personal perspective, it's the same for me. I have two brothers, an older brother, a younger brother, and I do have a younger sister, but she came along quite a little bit later. So there's an 11-year gap between us. So growing up, it was always me and the two boys. And I remember that my parents are quite liberal, or the thinking of liberal, even though they come from a background that's supposed to be more conservative. And my father was a politician, so he again was in that space of traditional leadership. But I always remembered growing up that my family, extended family, would joke that I was bossy. But my father was like, you're a natural leader. And I know we speak about all these things, but taking a step back, I think as you said, I think the concept of leadership does actually start from home. It starts from that base. And I think if I could throw it back,
Absolutely.
think that affected your understanding of leadership. Like if you didn't have the upbringing that you did, do you think that there would have been the chance that you'd be where you are right now or not?
No, I mean, not a chance, to be honest. When we talk about upbringing, sometimes we just, kind of gloss over it quickly and just say, I had an upbringing, grew up with boys, and I was affirmed. But it really is more than that. We all know just how powerful our our families can be in terms of just setting role models for us. My first and probably my foremost role models are my parents, and my mother is really the strong African woman. I know sometimes we don't like the phrase, but she really is that woman who was, who could carry it all. She was a professional woman who'd come back home at night and check in on all of us, make sure, everything is going well with her kids. She was invested in, extended family and family life as well. But I think what was the most powerful example for me was their relationship, my parents' relationship itself, in that, I never ever had my dad say to my mom, you can't do this because you're a woman. My mom sat in on family meetings, the ones that are traditionally called, for the men only. She sat in. My dad made sure that she had her say if it was anything to do with our family. Whenever my dad was communicating about decisions that had to do about him or his inheritance or anything like that, he always said we, as in me and my wife, have agreed on doing this. Just another kind of powerful example that I saw from their relationship dynamic was my mom was not a fashionista. She isn't like but I also never had my dad say to my mom, you cannot leave the house looking like that, or you cannot wear that. And I look back now and these may seem like little things or simple things, but I just got a strong sense of personhood that was modeled by my own mother, but that my dad also affirmed and sort of allowed. He nurtured it, and I didn't grow up with kind of like there's another way of being a woman. I just knew the one vision, which was my mom, which was that you said what you thought, you showed up, you were present, you did what you could. If you were involved in any endeavor, you gave it your best. And if you are the best, then that's okay too. You don't need to apologize to anyone. And so, I think when we talk about upbringing, it just helps sometimes for us to really talk about the details. A lot of us are at a stage where we're becoming parents now, and some of us are deliberate about those decisions and others are not so deliberate. But we've got to be paying attention to what we're modeling for our kids, both our sons and daughters. I think, I don't know, I'd have to sit down with my brothers and even explore their minds about how they think my mother's example shaped their own, development or their experience. But for me, it was the most powerful anchor.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. And shout out to your mom. She sounds like a wonderful
Shout out to her indeed.
your mom. I think, yeah, listening, as you said, I think we don't, and I wish we could go deeper into all of our upbringings. And I think, yeah, because the interest of time, but I mean, this conversation around just because it is bigger than just you and I, it's about female leadership. And I think you bring a really interesting point about how much anchoring upbringing can have. I think I put myself in a very similar position with you, being quite privileged that my parents have such a loving relationship. My father is one of the wisest men I know. My mother is just so absolutely caring and understanding and sacrificial in a way that she never gave up herself. I mean, I'm very open about the fact that my parents left home, be it forcefully. My father was exiled from Sudan, but my mom left with my dad, and it was because of us. And I think when we speak of upbringing, and this is just an interesting, bit to bring in, because we're speaking broader than just ourselves, is how does leadership look for someone who does not necessarily have that upbringing? And I speak from my perspective in terms of, I look back at some of my family members or cousins or friends of cousins who, not to say that Sudan is a bad country per se, but that, again, me having grown up outside of the country, me having had the opportunities I was afforded, and my parents not necessarily fitting a mold that allowed me to be the leader I wanted to be. And I look back at some younger girls back home where they don't have that opportunity, and it's not a blame game, but it is a situation that's the the reality. I've seen girls who, the goal for them is to get married, not to say something wrong with marriage, but that's their be all and end all, is to be subservient to someone else. So I think that would be an interesting thing. I'd like to get your understanding on that, is what do you think leadership can exist when the foundation for it wasn't built in the most traditional form?
Yeah. I think that, the beauty about life is that it humbles all of us, there is, so I'm Christian, and really my spiritual base is just my faith in God and his word, which is the Bible. And I say this because I'm about to quote a little passage of scripture that says, there's a time for everything, and this part that talks about time and chance happening to all. And so it's not always given that if you're born with a relative silver spoon in your mouth that you've already won the race. I think that, we all get to a point or mature to a point where what we become is now a matter of the choices that we make, and not just the choices that were made for us. And when that point comes, I think that's where it's really critical to have support, to have the insight and the awareness, to recognize that I'm now maturing out of, the things that may have shaped me as a childhood, and I'm now deciding on who I become and what I become. And of course, this is not to ignore that there may be some, serious external circumstances like war, or, things like that, that you cannot personally affect. But there really comes a time in everyone's life where your outlook in life is dependent or tied to mostly what you decide it will be, like the choices that you make. And when that fork comes, I think it really is powerful how it can catapult somebody who may have felt like they're at the back of the race to actually like leading position. And it's also a place where those who may have been privileged or may have had a solid foundation can make very poor decisions that can set them back. So I say this too, to agree with you that, it's not always the case that if you had, like a difficult upbringing, that your life is a write-off or that things can never change. It's always a new day. There's always an opportunity to do better. And in fact, I think, the most mature people are people who can reflect not only on their lives and experiences, but on those of others, and learn and decide, that I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to do better.
100%. I think that's exactly it, is that every situation is different, but every situation has something you can learn from. And even that, the silver spoon situation, I mean, I know I've had a relatively good upbringing, relatively good adulthood, and I'm like, there's still every day, I'm like, there's something new I must learn. There's someone who's had a better life or a worse life. And I think the other big thing is that, as we've already spoken about the changing times, and we'll touch a little bit on this a bit later, but to say that there are so many women leadership role models that we have to look at outside of, regardless of what your network looks like. And I think that's quite important. So, I mean, I think that first question also just highlights that the journey of leadership is not clean set. It's not one specific way. Even the definition of leadership itself, and I wanted to touch on this in the next question we're going to talk about, but that I think when we define leadership as well, a lot of it is around titles and recognition. And, you are a leader if you've spoken in front of 1,000 people. And for me, I think that definition of leadership is something that's very different, something that's quite important. But also to say, especially female leadership, and I think in the fourth question, we'll get to this, is that, in a lot of cases, you have female leaders who are not, framed as the leader. You'd have a man at the helm, that, but we'll get to that. So let me not get too ahead of myself. So I think the second question I kind of want to ask, and this is, we're getting nice and deep and personal, and we'll have your reflections, then I'll give a little bit of my own, is, would you say in your lifetime that you've always had the courage to remain true to yourself and your passions and the morals that you hold dear for you within that framework that we've been discussing with leadership? So have you always been true to Rumbi? If you have, how? If you haven't, how did that feel? What did that make you, what did you go through?
I don't think anyone can answer yes to that question.
I'm perfection. Yeah.
The first lie that they tell if they say, yes, I've always been true to myself. I say that, well, the answer is no for me. One, because I needed to journey, and I'm still on a journey to, get to really understand Rumbi and why she exists. And in some moments I have more clarity. Like now I have more clarity than I did when I was maybe a teenager or when I was in university. I have a little bit more confidence about my purpose and my reason for existence, but I don't feel like I understand it completely. But the other side is also that, I think the most difficult challenge that I continually face is a challenge of facing myself. Like, have I always had the courage to do so? No. Sometimes it was easier to say it's not my fault. I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't place myself here. Whatever environment that may be. Or to make excuses for myself. But the courage to be self-aware, to own my mistakes, to own my ambitions, even if they feel bigger than me, to own what I think I represent, to own my values, that hasn't always been a given. So no, the answer is no. I haven't always had the courage to lead, if you can put it that. Not even the courage to lead myself. It's been a process of development.
Yeah. No, I mean, thank you for that honesty. And I want to get back to, because I'm going to follow up the question with how do you think we then get that courage? And we don't have to answer that now. I think it's also just to have a think on that. I think when Ubuma reached out and we wanted to have these conversations, a lot of it was based on very raw honesty. And I remember reading through these, and when you're saying, phrases like leading yourself, I think that hits really deep in a corner of my heart. I mean, in my situation, I've always used to say that I don't like the term identity crisis per se, but when having to hold dear to morals and my own passions, I think growing up for me, it was always quite difficult because, I was raised in one lifestyle. I was raised in a specific culture. I was raised with specific morals. And then I grew up in a completely different society. And I remember for me personally, and to this day, I have people who are like, oh no, you look like you've got it under control. You have such a great job. You have friends. And I'm like, it's really not. And it took me a while to be able to reach that space of honesty. And as you said, I think when we talk about leadership, it's such a personal thing where we talk about leadership and you'd be, definition leading a group of people, or be it however large, presidential scale, something very small like, a debate team. Leadership for me was something I really had to seriously start dabbling with in high school. And specifically when we talk about that gendered lens of leadership, I went to an all-girls high school, and I think in my personal development, that is something I attribute a very high level of, appreciation to. I think if I did not go to the specific high school I went to, I would not have ended up being the woman I am today. But in that leadership, I know, and I don't know if this is something only I would feel, that sometimes it was easier for me to put on a mask of the leader I thought I needed to be for the group I needed to lead. And then sometimes I'd come back home and be like, wait, that's not what you believe in. And I think, I went through a lot of changes in high school. And I mean, to this day now, it's moved my leadership position from that within a kind of junior realm of schooling to where I am at work, where I know I have an impact. But I think for me, the courage question, so I'll respond to my own question and then I'll push it back to you about how did I overcome that? And it was such a silly experience. Well, I'll never forget this. In matric, when I was announced as head girl of our school, I remember I went to our headmistress and I was like, listen, can I just have a chat with the girls? And I went to school, there's 1,000 students. And she was like, that's a bit weird, but what do you mean? I was like, can we just have an assembly where it's just myself and the girls, no teachers, no staff, we just want to have a chat. And that was the first time I was 100% authentic. And I was like, girls, this is who I am. There's this vision of me. I was a debater, so I was very good about speaking on the spot. I can immediately change my tone when I needed to. I was trained for that for 5 years. And I was like, you need to be honest and vulnerable as a leader. You need to be honest with your group to be like, I am courageous, but I know there are things that I need to work through. And so I think for me, in terms of the courage, is remembering that leadership should not be lonely. And that's something I'm taking with me now, even now, in the professional workspace, which we can also get to, but that has completely turned my life on its head. I work in an international organization, and it's been my dream since I was a child, since I first saw, the world of diplomacy. And there's just so much to learn every day, and it gets lonely. It really, really gets lonely. And I just think for me, finding the courage is something that you find within other people, because you're not leading for yourself. And I'm a big proponent of servant leadership, that no one should be in it for the glitz and glam. Like, did it look nice that I had a nice head girl badge and like a white blazer and all that? Like, sure. But at the end of the day, that wasn't what I cared about. And I think if you're in leadership for the glam and the sparkle, you shouldn't be there. I do think there's a separate conversation, and we can bring that up later, that comes with recognition, where it's due. But for me, I think that question about remaining true to yourself is, as you said, is this first that need to get to know yourself and to trust yourself. And I don't know, and I've never met a single person who can say they're 100% good with, themselves. But yeah, just to say that I think courage comes from people you surround yourself with. And I am very aware, and I know you spoke about your spirituality and your religion, and I think it's the same for me in my faith, is that you are surrounded, and God has placed people in your life for a reason. And for me, that's my big thing, is that leadership should not be lonely. But yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, we have the word courage, but we also have the word encourage, right? It means that, sometimes you don't have a courage within yourself. You need to be encouraged. And it definitely helps to have people around you who share the same values as you, but also people who can see you for you. I think I just wanted to pick up on where you left off by saying that just the value of having people who can speak into your life and call out, your gifts, your kind of unique attributes, things that you don't necessarily see in yourself or pay attention to or even value. It helps to have people around you and to not try to mold yourself into a leader by yourself, just by maybe like reading books or watching self-help videos, or actually real life interactions with people are what molds you or what gets you closer to who you are, and not just kind of the ideas that you may gather through like an intellectual process.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's also interesting. You speak about like reading self-help books, and now I'm going off topic a bit, but I find those also quite interesting, because you have to step back and ask yourself, as one, you're young, two, you're a woman, and three, a Black woman. And I'm like, when I read these self-help books, I'm like, I wasn't the audience for this, especially the more traditional kind of books where I'm like, that wasn't written for me in mind. That wasn't written for my generation or for my circumstance. And I think, as you said, that those personal experiences are really important. Yeah. But if I could throw one back at you now, because now I've gotten thinking, because I know I have people in my life who, in a heartbeat, I know they would drop everything for me. And I think those kind of relationships are developed over time. I mean, my best friend is someone who I could phone him at 3 a.m. and I know he would pick up. He's my biggest supporter. I mean, he's watching this right now. But to say that I know in my, because of the length of that interaction with friends from high school, with friends from work. And I think when we get to an older level of leadership, let's put it that way, my question to you would be, how can you tell the authenticity of people who want to be on your side and support you? As much as we talk about how lovely leadership is, I mean, we can't ignore that it's quite a competitive space. The world we're living in, for multiple reasons, has to be competitive. And I think that's a whole separate conversation around competition versus collaboration. But to say, if I had to put it very simply, if I'm thinking to my younger self and like who to trust, like I've got my people, but when I enter a new space, how do I know, you're my person? How would, like in your experience, how have you known that?
I say, and I think my answer is more refined because of hindsight and reflection. But my current approach is to focus on me. Okay. The work is my work, and I try not to place burdens on other people that are mine. So if I'm entering a new space, I am trying to be authentic, and I am, my aim is to be reliable. If I'm there to do the work, I want to do the work excellently. And so those are like my primary goals. And usually that actually in itself weeds out people who are not aligned with that kind of thinking. So it's almost how you portray or project yourself puts you in the company of people who share similar values. And if somebody doesn't and they still like to hang around you, I think you can tell that, we have a difference in values or difference in opinions in this area. And you can decide, nobody can force you to be in a close relationship with them. You decide, the space that somebody else holds in your life. And that's on you, that's not on them. And that's why I started off by saying that, it's not I try not to place the pressure on other people that they must look like this, they must act like that, they are on their own journey. And I'm on mine. And so I take responsibility for my own journey, take responsibility for letting people in, and I take responsibility for getting it wrong sometimes. And I take responsibility for redressing, any steps that, that I may take incorrectly.
Yeah, no, that's great. As you said, I think, again, it comes back to leadership starts with you. It's a personal journey that then you grow from. So I think that's beautiful. I really like that advice. Well, now to go back, I guess, to where we were on the questions and conversations, going back to the conversation on courage. Right. I think a bit about, where is that in terms of personal space, the people around you, how you can get courage there. And I think here we just wanted to get a bit of a reflection on, the struggles you have had in your own journey of finding courage in a difficult time. Obviously, I mean, you can share what you're comfortable sharing, but it would be great to hear, like a moment of struggle and what it was and how you got through that.
I have many moments, and I don't know if it's because, I'm just maybe less courageous than everybody else. But I've had many moments of, and many of them have to do with struggling to express myself, wondering if I will come across, with the right intent, and whether my words will have any impact. And that's, one way of expressing myself. The other has also been just the journey of me being, embracing the way I look. I wear my hair natural. I've done that for many, many years, but there was also a time when I felt like I can't, I have to relax my hair. You can't go out like that. Um, and I also had to work through that and journey through that and get to a point where it was like, I like myself. I like my hair. I like my skin like this. Not painted. I do paint it sometimes, but that's optional. It's not a minimum requirement for me to kind of take up space in the world. I've also had kind of struggles with my place as a young person. I kind of moved up into leadership positions when I was young, but even now as an older person, much older person who's no longer a youth, I still look young. So a lot of people often, they do the double take, like,
like what? Yeah.
Is that the, is that your head? Is that your,
Yeah.
And I also had to embrace that. Like, I'm not trying to look old or older or whatever age. This is just me. Like, but in some ways, I think the wisdom in those different journeys has also been kind of learning to factor in how I come across to other people and to make decisions about what it is, one, I can change, but more importantly, what it is I want to change and what I'm not willing to change so that those people can accept me. I think that, like, the world is actually more open to authentic people, and it's somehow like a myth we all feed into, that if I looked like and if I acted like, and then I'd be more acceptable. And then we spend so much time and energy trying to be anything else other than who we actually are. But when we show up as who we are, like even now, even though I'm telling you that people sometimes do a double take because they think I'm too young to be in the room or to have the responsibility that I have, they are the same people who also respect me once we actually get to the work, because I deliver. And so instead of changing me to make myself appear like I can deliver, I have just decided to focus on delivery. I improve my skills, I improve the quality, I learn constantly, but then that means I don't have to compromise on who I am so that I can be a more credible leader. I've decided that the work and the quality of the work is what I can shape or change. And so those are some examples of, the struggles that I've had. And, how courage has emerged. Courage is one of those virtues that, like patience, you can't say I'm patient until you've had to wait. It's the same thing with courage. It's only up until you've had to hit that brick wall, or you've had to go through it, that you can then go, okay, I took a courageous step, or I took a bold step. So my journey with developing courage in self-acceptance and projecting what I think is truly authentically me has also been tested through all of these trials. And it continues to be, you move to a different level, you've mastered one sphere, one area, you move to a new one, and suddenly you're there and you're wondering, am I the right person for the job? And so it's a constant kind of process of developing courage. But like I said earlier on, most of it is a courage to deal with you, to deal with yourself before you even deal with what's being thrown at you from the outside.
I just, listening to you, and I mean, I knew this was going to come up when you talk about the self. And I think it gives me some hope as well to know that, I mean, I know you keep saying you're older, not much older, but as a younger person, and it's very difficult for me to admit it. to say that I'm not secure in myself. And I know that holds me back. And it's good to know that, I mean, because sometimes I'm like, wait, that can't be it, right? Because as I said, in my experience of leadership, and this is a very honest reflection, is I was always seen as I don't like to use the word perfect very loosely, but I was that perfect kid. I mean, growing up for my parents, I was their golden daughter, in between the two boys. So it was also like extra loving care there. School, I was, valedictorian. And so for me, when I listen to your conversation on struggles and I try to reflect on my own, my struggle has always been, I was always raised to be a specific person. And if I'm being completely honest, is I think I had a breaking point where I was like, for the longest time I can remember, I was being the person everyone expected me to be. And it comes back to that point of acceptance, because it's not great to say this, and not to say that I wasn't authentic in who I was, be it in my high school leadership positions, primary school, university. I think there's a level of authenticity, but it was an authenticity based on what I thought people wanted in their spaces. And I had that breaking point. I speak a lot about my matric experience, because I think in that space of leadership, I learned so much. I have friends that I hold so dearly to my heart. Some of the younger girls, one of my closest friends who I respect and I look up to her. She's 5 years younger than me. She was in grade 8 when I was head girl. And those kind of experiences, I remember I sat down with her and I was like, this is who I thought I was. And now I think my biggest struggle in finding my own courage is to be like, well, what does Maryiam want? And a big part of that self-acceptance for me, I think, will make my leadership stronger and better. I think when we talk about the concepts of leadership, when we talk about what we think a leader should be, again, as you said, it comes back to that self. So I think for me, my struggle has been now is taking a step back and being like, I think there are parts of who I was that I obviously do agree with. I think, again, my upbringing, my leadership positions that I was able to hold, my current, space and work that I'm able to hold, I so dearly and deeply grateful for it, the people I have. But it's, as you said, it's that you have to be centered in who you are. And then, because at the end of the day, we're talking about finding courage in difficult times, when the going gets tough, those are usually the moments when you're like, damn, I'm by myself, and you need to pull on yourself to get there. And I think for me, if I'm being completely authentic, is to say that I'm learning that and I'm enjoying this journey. I mean, there's a lot of tears. There's a lot of long phone calls with friends and, kind of deconstructing things I thought were the way, but even, deconstructing and reconstructing the same thought and the same belief. So it's not as if I'm changing who I am, but I've now taken ownership of that change. It's now that, I've come to this realization because I, as Maryiam, have come to this realization. And I think, if anything, for me, it's just to say that the way we view people and the way we view their leadership. And even earlier I was gassing you up about how great you are, but I know you have personal struggles. In the same way in my space, I think for me, leadership has also been such a big deal because of my younger sister. And she's in a very sensitive adolescent phase of her life. Puberty is not fun. And I'm like, as you said, I would be setting that up. So I think, the struggles of leadership, come to the self, which is really great to hear.
Hey, there's freedom on the other side, so let me just say it's worth it. I remember kind of starting my work life and being sort of very not worried per se, but being concerned about the fact that I didn't like to talk much, and I didn't like networking events, and I didn't like team building events. And it took me a good number of years to eventually realize that I am an introvert, to put a name to it, and to be able to understand that I didn't like team building events, not because I don't like being with my team, but I don't like almost a forced way of connecting, like sit here, now open up.
Right. This is how
but I'd more, more easily open up if somebody just came up and we were having an organic conversation, which ended up being very deep. In fact, I love having deep, meaningful conversations. But realizing that, getting to the point where I was like, hey, this is how I'm wired. Gave me a greater sense of freedom. I didn't put pressure on myself to be social if I did make it to these networking events. I also figured out little tricks that I can do, like to get a conversation to become deep and meaningful very quickly. I hate just kind of having shallow conversations. How's the weather? How's the, so I figured out that if I'm actually invested, I can direct a conversation, I can channel a conversation, and I grew more confident in kind of my personality type and my wiring, and more free just to interact with people in general.
Which again comes back to, as you said, it's that introspection, that self-understanding, that self-awareness that you can then, and I think for me at least, the biggest takeaway here is that growth will happen, growth is good, and it will continue happening. I think that's also a really important consideration to have when we talk about young women and young women in leadership, because I mean, I don't know if it's just me, but I've started to see a lot younger women start getting into these spaces of leadership. I mean, I was in my first job at 20, and I was like managing huge debate tournaments, and I think that's a really nice consideration. I wish I could tell past Maryiam to be like, you may be the baby of the room and people are going to make jokes and call you the child or the kid or whatever it may be, but that doesn't demean or take away from who I am as a leader. And to say that, as you said, that growth is continual, that growth will happen, and until I'm 70, 80, God willing, I last that long, and that, that will continue happening. So I think that that's a really beautiful consideration. And so I'm cognizant of time, but there's just one last point I think we want to just discuss. And just, I guess, to wrap it all up, we've spoken about the struggle, we've spoken about our definition and understanding of leadership, we've spoken quite a bit about courage. And I think it links quite nicely to what you were speaking about, is, having to put a label on it that you'd be considered an introvert. For as long as I remember, I've been considered the extrovert. Like the events that you hate, I'm just like, bam, bam.
You're the people I'd run away from.
Yeah. Well, that just happened because now we can't run, but it's exactly that. But even that, I think, changes. In high school, I was always that extrovert, let me, yay, parties. Now I'm like, I'm a little bit more reserved, and I want to protect my peace and protect my sanity. But when it comes to, introvert, extrovert, ambivert, whatever it may be, we talk about the voice and your voice. And so I think the last thing I wanted to discuss would be, the cultivation of the power of our voice. So in your experience, how were you able to cultivate that power, in the spaces that you now are in?
Yeah, sure. So there's a lot to talk about here, but for the sake of time, I'd say for me there are two things that I have realized, like that they make your voice count, and they make your voice really powerful. The first thing is to speak, is to use the voice. But that's a basic, that's the foundation. That's not one of the two I actually want to talk about. The two are speaking truthfully and listening. So when you do what you say you will do, and when you mean what you say and people know that, your words carry power. So it could be simple things like, I'm going to be here at 2, and then you woke up at 4. And if that happens a few times, we all know that after a while, we're just like, okay, you're saying 2, but we know you won't be there. Same thing with commitments. It's the same thing in a professional setting. If you say, I will take on this work, and you do half of it and you don't see it through, if you say, I will do this work excellently and you don't do it excellently, if you say, I can take on this position, and then you take it on and you don't hold that office in high regard or take seriously the work that you're doing, all of that erodes the power of your voice. And so I mean, it's almost like it's an easy strategy, but it's difficult at the same time to hold yourself up to a higher standard.
Yeah.
Mean what you say what you mean, and do what you say you will do.
Yeah.
That's the first thing. The second thing is listen. I'm still learning on this one. Just with everything else, I'm still learning, but this is a big lesson for me, for someone who's opinionated, uh, and who feels like I have the freedom to express my opinions. It's difficult sometimes for me to hold back and listen, but I've realized that you actually have a greater influence on somebody that you're engaging with when you understand a little more about where they're coming from. And people don't always say where they're coming from. When we open our mouths, we don't always start with the history. Like, I have this thought because it was formed when I was 5, when this happened, and that doesn't always come across, right? But it requires like attentive listening. It requires intentional investment in this person, finding them worthy of your time and the conversation, before you can just say, and this is what I think. um, and very often, sometimes, like I've started doing this, like when I watch conversations, even debates, like whether it's on YouTube or TV, and sometimes I'm just like, you're not having the same conversation. When you're watching and you're observing, you can hear one person is saying this, the other is going off in a different direction, but apparently this is a conversation.
I know that.
Just like, no, you're not having a conversation. Yeah. One or both or more of you are not listening. You're not hearing each other on actually where you're missing each other. You're not making an effort to find the same page. All you want to do is to speak and be heard, which is a poor goal for communication, because the point of communication is not that I've just expressed myself. It's that we find the mutual ground, we find meaning, we move forward together. So yeah, for me, there will be those two things: just speaking truthfully and listening.
100. Wow. I mean, you hit it on the head. You hit it exactly on the head. That's perfect. I think, as I mentioned, I was a debater. I was a debating coach for many years. And from that, I experienced, especially that last point you were saying, is that a lot of people, speak just to be heard. And that is so counterproductive, especially when, we're talking in the space of leadership. I think for me, when you speak about that, the voice is so much bigger than just the physical representation of it. It's bigger than just the sound you make. And even taking a step further, it's bigger than your accent. It's bigger than your tone. That's something I feel very strongly about, because I was, not that I regret it, and I'm happy, I guess, with how I sound. And I know you mentioned, the way you look and physical appearance. I was trained to sound a specific way. Growing up, I was told that as a girl, my voice was too sing-songy and too pretty to listen to, that they don't really hear what I'm saying. I'll never forget that. A coach once told me that. And so I think that, to me, signifies, just as you were saying, is that the term voice, and when we talk about the power that you afford a voice, is so much bigger than just having a platform, having the way to speak. I mean, I think our voice can also be manifested in so many different ways. As you said, you could be an introvert. My younger sister is very much introverted, but if you read her writing, you would be, blown away. I have friends who, I think the power of your voice, and again, I think we keep coming back to this authenticity, this yourself, and exactly what you said is you need to, mean what you say and say what you mean. In saying that, I think the power of your voice can only be truly manifested once you understand where that's coming from and what you want to achieve with it. And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what platform it comes across. It doesn't matter, if you have a twang or if you don't, or whatever it may be, that the power of your voice is something so personal. And I think specifically in leadership, and because, just, to round up our conversation, I think we're talking about young female leaders, to say that your voice has power, no matter what anyone has told you in the past, no matter what you think is your voice, no matter what you think your place in society is. So I mean, I wish we had so much more time, and I'm totally going to hit you up offline to be like, let's be best friends, to say, I think we've had a really nice conversation about leadership or what it means to be a woman. I think in closing, I don't know, Rumbi, if there's, or we say Rumbidzai, your full name, because I think the conversation we had earlier as well was just, again, you are a strong, phenomenal leader, and I want to offer your full name the respect it deserves. To wrap up the conversation of everything we've discussed, what is one reflection you'd like to leave everyone with?
I think that we talked a lot about leadership without maybe actually setting out the parameters of what it means to each of us. This is something that I just always feel is important to remind people, to remind women, to remind anybody who feels marginalized and anybody who feels like they're not a leader. That, just for me, a leader is somebody who cares and they serve. And there are people who are going to watch this and they're going to go out there to Google and look for my titles and the work that I've done. And that's all that they're going to focus on. There are others who will take the time to learn about the actual work beyond the title, what it is I was doing, how was I serving, and how do I demonstrate my care. And the latter group, they're the ones who are really concerned about leadership. But this isn't to throw shade in anyone, but really just to encourage anybody who's watching out there, that, leadership isn't about popularity, it isn't about titles. We definitely need more leadership on the continent. And by that, I mean, we need more people who care and who serve. So if you're watching this and you're thinking, hey, she's amazing, she's a leader, you are one too, if you care and you serve. And the fact that you may not be on the other side of this camera does not make you any less of a leader. And the fact that somebody is going to be maybe speaking on the news tonight does not make them any more of a leader. If we all took responsibility for our continent and the things that need to change, if we all cared for one another and did our best to serve, then, we'd see a great deal of change in Africa within a few years.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I think that's a perfect way to end this conversation, is the authenticity of leadership, that it comes from a space of you genuinely care. There's love, there's passion behind it. And I mean, we didn't even open up the can of worms called imposter syndrome.
That's for another day.
That's for another day. It's a whole other
yes.
I think that one hit me quite hard, as you said that, everyone has the potential to be a leader. It doesn't matter where you came from, doesn't matter who you are, doesn't matter what your surname is. As long as you care and you're passionate, I think that's it. So yeah, this was a lovely chat. It felt really short for an hour. I hope this is an inspiration to anyone watching, especially young girls, that, leadership is changing. I really do have faith that we're coming back to that authentic, passionate servant leadership. And I see that in a lot of the people I get to interact with on a daily basis. So I'm quite confident for the future of our continent, and of the world as a whole. So thank you so much, Rumbidzai, for this chat.
Thank you, Maryiam, and thank you to Uma Leadership and Constitution Hill for having us.
Great. Thanks, everyone.